From the pages of a manuscript found amongst the effects of the late Sherlock Holmes, dated February 24th, 1898. The Reverend Charles Lutwidge Dodgson died at Guildford on January 14th, 1898. When that sad announcement was made to the world, hundreds of children knew and felt that they had lost a friend. What they could not know was that the man they knew as Lewis Carroll died a horrible death at the hands of an assassin. It is my earnest hope that they will never know. On the morning of the 16th, I received a visit from Dean Liddell, who, as well as being the Reverend Dodgson's closest friend, was also the father of Alice, the little girl immortalized in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. He expressed his earnest belief that the Reverend Dodgson had been murdered and begged me to investigate at once. He further pressed me to maintain the utmost secrecy, and I did not hesitate to assure him that I would mention the matter to no living soul, not even my colleague, Dr. John Watson. Although the Reverend Dodgson had died in Guildford, I was of a certainty that I would find nothing there to advance my investigation. Dean Liddell concurred with me on this point, and he suggested that I go without delay to Christ Church College, Oxford, where Dodgson had resided for most of his adult life. That very day I set off for and arrived in Oxford, and immediately found myself surrounded by intrigue. What came to light thereafter is so fantastic that it must seem to spring from the idle fancies of a disordered mind. I therefore feel compelled to impose upon it an order of my own, however arbitrary it may be. Here then, in alphabetic arrangement, are the key elements that have so far been brought to light regarding the murder of Lewis Carroll. Alice. I interviewed at length Mrs. Reginald Hargreaves, who was initially reluctant to confirm that she had been born Alice Liddell. Why she should wish to hide this fact from me is just one mystery amongst many. I was left with the impression that she felt ashamed of her past. When I asked her what she knew of Wonderland, she replied that her only knowledge of it came from that extraordinary work of fiction into which she had found herself extrapolated. Quote, "As a little girl, a distinct lack of imagination excluded me from Wonderland. Stories of mad hatters and magic mushrooms meant nothing to me. Reverend Dodgson knew the landscape he had created in intimate detail, as did the Alice he invented. I am not that Alice, nor have I ever been." Mrs. Liddell later sent me a note in which she apologized if she had received me in less than good grace. She added there was more to Wonderland than Lewis Carroll dared reveal. Fictitious or not, to him it was a real place, no further removed than the Isle of Wight. He often spoke to me cryptically of foul deeds and sinful practices perpetrated by the inhabitants of his imaginary realm. I believe he was truly afraid of some threat emanating from within its borders.
Really?
Reading through the Reverend Dodgson's diary, I came across several references to Brillig and noted that his hand must have trembled each time he penned that word. It soon became clear that 4 o'clock in the afternoon was a time regarded with dread by the deceased. Caterpillar. Pressed neatly between 2 pages of the diary, I discovered the dried corpse of a caterpillar. The entry for that day contained the following passage. "The caterpillar is a drug fiend who refuses to mature. I am the man who has seen himself in the looking-glass and found himself wanting. If the caterpillar will not become the butterfly, the caterpillar must die." Dodgson. Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, the son of the Reverend Charles Dodgson, Archdeacon of Richmond, was born at Daresbury Parsonage, Cheshire, on January 27, 1832. He was sent to school at Richmond, Yorkshire. From thence he went to Rugby and to Christ Church, Oxford. Mathematics were then, as always, his chief study. In 1854 he gained a first-class degree in that subject, and in 1855 he was appointed mathematical lecturer at Christ Church, which post he held till 1881. In 1861, Dodgson was made a senior student of his college and was also ordained deacon in the Church of England. Euclid. Aside from his works of fiction and poetry, Dodgson built much of his reputation on a series of mathematical texts written in a humorous vein. And chief amongst these is Euclid and his modern rivals, a copy of which I discovered in his room at Oxford. This particular edition was bound in red leather embossed with a series of geometric designs. Few people would have perceived the true nature of those devices, but I recognized them at once as arcane symbols. much favored by a little-known branch of Freemasonry. Was Lewis Carroll, and student of ancient lore, was the creator of imaginary lands, inspired by glimpses of forgotten worlds? Freemason? I raised the notion of Masonic connections with Dean Liddell when he visited me at my hotel in Oxford. "My dear Holmes," he exclaimed, "you indeed live up to your reputation. I did not think you would hit so quickly upon what I perceive to be perhaps the most crucial element of this whole affair. Forgive me for not mentioning the matter when I engaged your services. I did not think you would believe me. Yes, you are right. Charles did affiliate himself with a Masonic order, but I would venture it is one with which you are unfamiliar. Ensconced as I was in a remarkably comfortable chair, I nonetheless felt my spine stiffen at the suggestion that there might be such a gap in my knowledge of secret societies. I take it you are talking of the Grand Knights of the Order of the Rosy Cross." Dean Liddell nodded his head with such force that I feared he might injure his neck. "Yes, that's it exactly. The fellow involved himself in all sorts of ungodly mumbo-jumbo. Tell me, Dean, did he ever mention anything to you about Euclid?" "Why, of course, he was a mathematician." "But did he ever say anything about Euclid that struck you as odd or unconventional?" "Just the once. He mentioned to me that the universe was non-Euclidean, and that the order we see around us is an illusion made manifest by the limitations of our five senses. I confess I was largely unable to follow his train of thought, not least because we had both imbibed a goodly amount of wine." "Did he mention anything about other universes?" "Parallel worlds, you mean? Yes, he said something about them, but I cannot for the life of me recall what." "Ghosts. I spent my second night at Oxford smoking opium in the room that Charles Dodgson had until recently occupied. Contrary to my expectations, did not encounter any ghosts. Hallucinations. It was unwise of me to sample the brown substance I discovered hidden beneath Dodgson's writing bureau, wrapped in a 5-pound note. Indeed, I would have refrained from doing so but for the sliver of white card that lay beside it. On one side of the card was a price, 10 shillings and sixpence. On the reverse were the words, "Eat me." Deducing at once that the instructions referred to the brown substance, I broke off a piece the size of a blackcurrant and swallowed it. Immediately the room swelled to an enormous size. Conversely, it is likely that I shrank and the room retained its original dimensions. In Doctrinaire, following the equation defined in the poem The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll, taking 3, we add 7 and 10, and multiply out by 1,000, diminished by 8. The result we proceed to divide by 992, then subtract 17. The answer must be exactly and perfectly true. Viz. 3 plus 7 plus 10 times 1,000 minus 8 divided by 992 minus 17 equals 20 times 992. Divided by 992 minus 17 equals 20 minus 17 equals 3. Jabberwocky. The room ballooned out around me. I was confronted by a creature of many parts. The time was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Knave. I tracked down the Knave of Hearts to a cheap boarding house in Brighton. His lips were blue and the bedsheets were crimson. A cutthroat razor lay beside him. Before he died, the Knave confessed to playing a part in the conspiracy to murder Lewis Carroll. When I pressed him to reveal the identity of the ringleader, he trembled and cried that he could say no more. His last words were, "Beware the Jabberwock, my son! The jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch." As the Knave passed away, I checked my watch. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Liddell. One by one, the pieces were falling into place, but still I had no coherent picture. It was as if I had snatches of a tune, but no clear idea of the melody. I was certain, however, that neither Dean Liddell nor his daughter Alice were as innocent as they would have me believe. They were hiding something from me. On his deathbed, the Knave of Hearts had hinted at dark secrets concerning Alice's childhood friendship with Charles Lutwidge Dodgson. He spoke of certain sketches of young girls drawn by Dodgson that unsavory periodicals on the continent had circulated. The implications made me shudder. Exactly how much did Dean Liddell know? Mushrooms. I later analyzed the brown substance I had uncovered in Dodgson's writing bureau, and found it to be a mixture of cannabis resin and a mushroom unknown to me. A naturalist friend of mine who is greatly versed in the field of fungi was no more able to identify it than I. Later I was to look beneath the bureau, where I discovered a piece of parchment which bore the heading Ocean Chart. The chart was blank. New worlds. Examining Dodgson's diary convinced me that the man was in no doubt as to the existence of both Wonderland and the Looking-Glass Land. Nor could I altogether believe the man had merely deluded himself, for if all that he had written was but a fantasy, then many others shared it. Dodgson wrote that he had fled from both worlds and did not dare return. Opium. It is true that I am partial to the occasional pipe of opium, but it is beyond dispute that this habit of mine has harmed my mental faculties not one jot. Rather, it has contributed to my heightened state of awareness, has indeed enhanced rather than reduced my powers of reason. The hand of Morpheus has led me to paths known only to a blessed few. Through opium, Coleridge found Xanadu. I, in turn, have explored the inner depths of my own psyche. Opium has transformed my brilliance into genius. Poetry. On the night of his first visit to my hotel, Dean Liddell handed me a scrap of paper. "We may never know how Charles died," he declared, "but I think there might be a clue there. It was found clutched in his right hand during the course of his autopsy." A verse, I observed, apparently a fragment from a longer poem, The Hunting of the Snark. The loss of his clothes hardly mattered, because he had 7 coats on when he came, with 3 pairs of boots, but the worst of it was, he had wholly forgotten his name. "Would you know," I asked Liddell, "how many coats and how many pairs of boots the deceased owned at the time of his death?" 7 and 3, respectively. Queen. The beast, that was neither one creature nor another, slouched away and disappeared into a hole in the skirting board. I followed and found myself in a landscape of black and white squares that firmly resembled a chessboard. I cannot remember how I came to be running alongside the Red Queen. "What do you know, Your Majesty, of Lewis Carroll?" I demanded. "He's dead," came the reply, "and that is how he should be. The villain has wrought so much evil in this land and others, and his crimes will never be forgotten or forgiven. But why should that concern you, Mr. Holmes? Do you not know that he was but a pawn of the White Queen?" Where are we? We are on the square known as Queen's Bishop 4, and there are 64 squares. That old wives' tale. The answer you are looking for is 3 plus 7 plus 10 times 1000 minus 8, divided by 992 minus 17. At last I was beginning to understand the rules of the game, but still I had no inkling of the figure guiding the pieces. Rosicrucis. The Snark Equation appeared on the back of a picture I happened across in the Reverend Dodgson's closet. The picture was of a rose-covered cross. Also in the closet were a chalice and a small dagger. Both were embossed with the number 992. Shaking. It was beyond the Red Queen to resist me. Her face grew small and her eyes got large and green, and still as I went on shaking her, she kept falling apart, and all the parts of her crumbled until there was a fine red powder lying at my feet. I knew that she wanted to die, and I knew also that if I had not killed her, she would have killed me. Far away a bell tolled 4 times. Top Hat. I ingratiated myself with a group of students who invited me to share a drink with them at a tavern. After an evening filled with good humor, we adjourned to my hotel room and shared a pipe of opium. Under the influence of its narcotic fumes, they spoke freely, though seldom coherently, of a youth dressed in top hat and tails who had several times been observed surreptitiously entering the room occupied by Charles Dodgson. One claimed that the youth had attempted to sell him a quantity of a brown substance, claiming that it had properties both hallucinogenic and euphoric. I questioned my informant further, but he was by now too insensible to say anything more. Some minutes later, I searched his pockets and found a sliver of white card. On one side of the card was written 10 shillings and 6pence. On the other were the words, "Eat me," in bold copper lettering. Utopia. Throughout my week at Oxford, I heard many tales of the mysterious peddler. He was often referred to as the Mad Hatter. I encountered the youth but once. He was leaving the room of one of the students and took fright when he saw me in the corridor. With impressive speed, he half ran, half sprang down the stairs and was quickly out the door, at which point I lost all trace of him. Instinctively, I knew he had just completed some mischief, so I immediately entered the room from which he had emerged. There on the floor lay the body of William Hope, a student of English literature with whom I had but recently shared a drink. Probing the inside of his mouth, I found a ball of the brown substance beneath his swollen tongue. On his dresser, there was a note which read, "God bless Lewis Carroll and the Mad Hatter. Between them, they have shown me the way to Utopia." The time was 4 in the afternoon. Vasculum. Amongst Dodgson's possessions, I discovered a botanist's case filled with specimens of flora, the majority of which were of no earthly origin. There were several orchids and a fruit that resembled a striped pear covered in fine hairs. At the bottom of the case I found several dried mushrooms. The walrus seemed unconcerned at my act of regicide. He stood amongst the fine dust that had recently been his queen and looked at me gravely. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings. Mr. Carroll had 3 pairs of shoes, one for walking, one for running, and the other for stepping like a goose. He had ships to command, and guns, and all the tricks of a great mathematician, but alas for him, he had no idea how fast his universe could expand. It was the Red Queen who ended his life. She seduced him and then strangled him with her shift. But let me warn you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, it isn't over yet. If I were you, I would forget this matter entirely." "Tell me one thing," I begged, "then maybe I can let things rest. Who is the mastermind of this sorry business?" The walrus laughed. "You do not know? The hand which moves the pieces belongs to Moriarty." I suspected as much, and yet I did not dare believe. For the life of me, I cannot guess at his motives. "He plans world domination, Mr. Holmes, and it seems it is within his grasp. Then I must act fast, else my world is doomed." "Ah," said the walrus, with the gentlest of sighs, "it is not your world he seeks to dominate. X, the unknown quantity. When next I examined Carroll's ocean chart, there was an X written in the middle of the parchment. In his diary, Carroll wrote that only in algebra can we be certain that X can always be resolved. In a non-Euclidean universe, X can take on many meanings. Was he trying to tell me that his murder had no solution, or a multitude of them? Yard.
Upon my return to London, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard visited me in my rooms. He was anxious to learn the purpose of my visit to Oxford, and made it clear that he suspects there are sinister forces at work.
I told him that I had gone to consult a botanist friend upon the nature of a strange fungus that had come into my possession. Zarathustra. The last entry in Dodgson's diary refers to Zarathustrianism. This ancient Persian religion holds to the belief that the universe is a battleground for the powers of good and evil. In a shaky hand he has written, "Have I truly chosen the right side?